In 2022, while the world was focused elsewhere, a quiet but powerful shift happened in West Africa. A 34-year-old army captain stepped forward and took control of a nation pushed to the edge. Gunfire echoed through the capital. A president was removed and history changed overnight. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, but this was not just another military coup. It was the result of years of anger, insecurity, and broken promises. This is the story of how Ibrahim Traoré came to power and why millions are watching what he does next. Burkina Faso is a landlocked country in West Africa with a long history of political instability. Since gaining independence from France in 1960, the country has experienced multiple coups, assassinations, and military takeovers. But by the mid-2010s, Burkina Faso faced a crisis far worse than politics. Armed extremist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS began spreading across the Sahel region. Villages were attacked, schools were burned, soldiers were ambushed, civilians were killed in their thousands. By 2022, over 2 million people were displaced, and large parts of the country were effectively outside government control. Ordinary citizens were angry, soldiers were frustrated, and trust in civilian leadership was collapsing. Ibrahim Traoré was born in 1988 in Bondokai, western Burkina Faso. Unlike many political figures, his early life was largely ordinary. He studied geology at university, a background that suggests he once imagined a civilian future. But like many young men in Burkina Faso, Traoré eventually joined the armed forces, driven by a sense of duty as insecurity worsened. Inside the military, Traoré developed a reputation as disciplined, serious, and outspoken. He served in counterterrorism operations in some of the most dangerous regions of the country. What shaped him most, according to those close to him, was watching fellow soldiers fight with insufficient weapons, poor intelligence, and weak leadership, while politicians in the capital appeared disconnected from reality on the ground. This frustration would later fuel his rise. In January 2022, public anger reached a breaking point. Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba overthrew President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore in a military coup. Damiba accused the civilian government of failing to protect the nation. The coup was widely supported by citizens who were desperate for security. Damiba promised reforms, better military coordination, and a renewed fight against terrorism. For a brief moment, it seemed like Burkina Faso had chosen a new path, but that hope would not last. Months passed, and instead of improvement, the security situation grew worse. Extremist attacks intensified. More territory fell into militant hands. Soldiers on the front lines complained of shortages, poor planning, and low morale. Inside the military, divisions began to form. Younger officers, including Ibrahim Traoré, believed that Damiba had lost focus. They accused him of prioritizing political power over battlefield realities. Reports emerged that Damiba spent more time in Ouagadougou than near the front lines. Trust between him and junior officers slowly collapsed. Traoré became one of the most vocal critics, not publicly, but within military circles. The September 2022 coup. On the night of September 30th, 2022, gunfire echoed through the streets of Ouagadougou. Soldiers blocked roads, state television went off air, panic spread through the capital. By morning, it was clear another coup was underway. Young officers announced they had removed Damiba from power, accusing him of incompetence and betrayal of the original mission. At the center of this takeover was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. At just 34 years old, he appeared on national television in military uniform, calm and composed, announcing himself as the new leader of Burkina Faso. Damiba was forced to resign and later fled the country. The coup was swift, decisive, and surprisingly met with celebration by many citizens. Why the people supported Traoré? Unlike many coups that spark outrage, Traoré's takeover was welcomed by large crowds. Why? Because many Burkinabe people saw him not as a power-hungry politician, but as one of their own, a soldier who had fought alongside ordinary troops. To the public, Traoré represented youth, honesty, courage, and resistance against failed leadership. In a region tired of broken promises, his age became a symbol of change, not inexperience. Traoré's ideology and message. In his early speeches, Ibrahim Traoré made one thing clear: this was not just a military takeover, it was a revolutionary mission. He spoke openly against foreign interference, particularly criticizing France's long-standing influence in the region. He emphasized national sovereignty, self-reliance, and dignity. Most notably, Traoré referenced Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader of the 1980s, who remains a hero to many Africans. Like Sankara, Traoré presented himself as a leader willing to challenge global powers and reject dependency. This messaging resonated deeply with African youth, especially on social media. Globally, reactions were mixed. Western governments condemned the coup, citing democratic principles and instability. Regional bodies imposed sanctions, but across Africa, especially among young people, Traoré was celebrated as a symbol of resistance against neo-colonial influence. Online, he was portrayed as fearless, principled, and revolutionary, sometimes even mythologized. However, critics warned that romanticizing military rule can be dangerous. Despite the excitement, reality remains harsh. Burkina Faso is still battling terrorism, economic hardship, and humanitarian crises. Military governments often promise reform, but struggle to deliver long-term stability. Traoré faces enormous pressure: defeat extremist groups, restore security, manage international relations, and eventually guide the country back to civilian rule. History shows that good intentions are not always enough. Ibrahim Traoré did not rise to power by accident. He emerged from a system broken by insecurity, frustration, and failed leadership. To his supporters, he is a new kind of African leader, young, bold, and unafraid. To critics, he is another military ruler in a region trapped in cycles of coups. The true story of Ibrahim Traoré is still being written, and whether he becomes a hero of African history or another warning depends on what he does next. This is the story of how Ibrahim Traoré came to power. If you enjoy deep African political documentaries, subscribe for more stories that shape the continent's future.